across all sectors is an absolute necessity. Our priorities as South Africa are very much aligned with the priorities for the 23 BRICS Summit, and they include: 1, strengthening post-pandemic socio-economic recovery and the attainment of the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. 2, transforming education and skills development for the future and strengthening post-pandemic socio-economic recovery and the attainment of the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. As the head of the National Disaster Management Center, Dr. Stolle has already alluded to, these themes also find traction in the priorities and targets of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, with the main goal being to prevent new and reduce existing disaster risks. Both priorities and the goal of the Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction effectively place the mainstreaming of disaster risk reduction at the top of governance and administration agendas. As such, efforts should be made to reduce vulnerability of communities as well as promote sustainability of our hard-hit economies. COVID-19 has highlighted the systematic nature of disaster risks. Reducing the risks of disasters, therefore, cannot be divided into categories that are only assigned to limited sectors such as health authorities, disaster management agencies, or early warning centers. Both priorities illustrate the act that disaster risk reduction solutions are needed across sectors such as education, water, sanitation, hygiene, nutrition, livelihoods, child and social protection, property, shelter, and housing, public open spaces, natural resources and ecosystem, critical infrastructure that is vital for delivery of all these services. It is worth making this meeting aware that President of the Republic of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, launched the South African Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan in 2021-2022 to identify and ameliorate priority areas to focus on as a country. In the quest to speedily address the effects of COVID-19 pandemic, the plan puts emphasis on the need for social partners to work on sustainable structural change in the economy that would unlock growth and allow for development across all sectors. It should be our government's joint conviction to massively mobilize all our resources and efforts in economic activities that will put the country's economy in a sustainable recovery trajectory. South Africa also boasts a robust disaster management legislation, the Disaster Management Act, Act 57 of 2002, that provides for an enabling framework to deal with any disaster in the country. Inasmuch as the Disaster Management Act proved to be a powerful legislative instrument to manage the COVID-19 pandemic through regulatory measures across all sectors, it must also be used to build resilience and instill principles of risk reduction across all sectors. This act puts responsibility on all organs of state to develop and implement credible disaster management plans that are informed by detailed risk assessment. I want to encourage all sectors in this room and beyond to take heed of this important call in the Disaster Management Act and comply accordingly. This will strengthen the country's measures to reduce our country's vulnerabilities against the adverse effects of disaster events and steer all of us towards resilience building. And this is more important, more so in this city, which has experienced 3 disasters within a short space of 2 years. My message to you all is that in adversity often comes opportunity. On the threshold of an important opportunity to imagine, and with a unity of purpose, BRICS member states are urged to utilize this opportunity to work together to reshape their economic landscape. Let us jointly emerge out of this meeting with the same objective of utilizing the opportunity to build inclusive economies that will benefit all BRICS member states. This kind of attitude aligns with our responsibility to come out of these meetings with a joint action plan that will strengthen the implementation of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction 2015-2030. The Paris Agreement on Climate Change and the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The Department of Cooperative Governance, under the leadership of Minister Nkadimeng, is looking forward to the robust engagements and sharing of good practice on the 2 priorities I have alluded to, and which are translated into the 2 main themes of today's discussions. I am confident that our BRICS collaboration can lay a solid foundation to advocacy and action-oriented program that will promote the understanding of disaster risk reduction, strengthening disaster risk governance, investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience, and enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery. Rehabilitation and reconstruction across BRICS bloc. Going forward, we must measure our disaster not in loss of lives or infrastructure, but rather in lives saved, as well as the social and economic losses avoided. Ours must be a data and information-driven response, which is faster and more effective. Our strategies must be adaptive, effective, to respond to multiple hazards or disasters, and should entrench an early warning system. And I'm glad that the South African Weather Bureau is also with us today. Let us collectively take the opportunity to look ahead and reflect on how global risk is in fact changing to provide us with appropriate levels of insight and to review our programs where required to deal with this change. Thank you very much.
Well, that is the BRICS Disaster Management Conference KZN, and speaking there was Mbulelo Jangana, who is the Director General of South Africa's Cooperative Governance, and we understand that actually the Minister is expected to speak tomorrow. We're going to take a quick ad break. When we come back, the agenda continues. So also understand that
But please join me as we really thank the members of the opening session. Yes. Thank you very much, colleagues. We now then move on to the next slot where we'll have keynote addresses by the heads of delegations. Allow me to invite to the
of 92.
podium,
the company has described him
the head of the technical delegation of Russia, Mr. Vladimir, let me read this carefully, Solovev. And let me also invite to the stage the head of the technical delegation of China, Ms. Yuan Yi. And of course, from South Africa, the Director General of the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, Dr. Robert Nkuna. We will also be joined virtually by the head of the technical delegation of Brazil, Mr. Paulo Falcao, and also from India, initially in the program, we had Ms. Mishra. I think the name has changed to Ms. Srivastava, who is the director from the National Disaster Management Authority. In India, she will also be joining us online. Thank you very much. So in this slot, we will be giving each representative to an opportunity to do some reflections on progress made on resolutions of the fourth meeting of the Joint Task Force for Disaster Management and other critical inputs that will be sharing with us in terms of the progress made in their respective countries insofar as this critical area of disaster management is concerned. I just want to check in terms of the program. We need to start with Brazil. I don't know if we are ready in terms of the connection to Brazil. Otherwise, we will then look at the program again and take colleagues who are here physically. Any indication? They are ready. We are ready in terms of the connection to Brazil. Otherwise, we will then look at the program again and take colleagues who are here physically. So that's how I sound. Any indication? We are ready. Mr. Paulo Falcao, are you? So that's how I sound. Nana, I think we're going to have to save time, colleagues. Let's start here in Ethekwini. I'll be advised by the technical team when we are ready to cross live to Brazil. Mr. Paulo Falcao, are you? So that's how I see. Nana, I think we're going to have to save time, colleagues. Let's start here in Ethekwini. I'll be advised by the technical team
when we are ready to cross live to Brazil. It's a let's answer. I'll be advanced level technicality. When we are ready to
can we sort out this? Because I want to hand over to the panel here, and we shouldn't be continuing to get this repetition and echo. May I assume that we are ready to start with the panel members who are here physically? And okay, it looks like it has, sounds like it has stopped now. So there are gadgets that have been circulated because some of the inputs might not be made in English. So colleagues should then be able to use those gadgets for purposes of translation. But without wasting any time, let me take this opportunity. I think we should start with China, shouldn't we? Let's start with China. So let's give this opportunity to the representative of China, Ms. Yuan He, who is the Deputy Director General, Department of Risk Monitoring and Integrated Disaster Reduction. Over to you. Let's welcome her, please.
金砖各国的各位参会代表、女士们、先生们，大家好。我是来自中华人民共和国应急管理部。那么首先呢，向南非联合执政与传统事务部，以及我们今天在这儿的跨祖努纳塔尔省南非德班市进行组织这次会议，表示衷心的感谢，也非常高兴有机会能够与金砖国家同仁们共同分享防灾、减灾、救灾工作方面的这个经验。自然灾害是人类面临的共同挑战。金砖各国呢都面临着复杂的灾害风险形势和艰巨的防灾、减灾、救灾工作任务。多年来呢，我们团结互助、精诚合作，在防灾、减灾、救灾方面开展了一系列务实交流合作，取得了丰富的成果。随着气候变化的加剧，极端天气气候事件等自然灾害的这个强度、频率、极端性的都持续增加，形成的潜在的威胁和造成的实际损失呢不断积累增长。同时，伴随着城镇化、工业化持续推进，我们人类包括还有我们的所居住的房屋、基础设施等各类承载体的这个暴露度、集中度、脆弱性也在不断增加。自然灾害的多灾种季局和灾害链的特征日益突出，对产业链、供应链影响日趋复杂，灾害风险的复杂性、关联性、跨界性持续加剧。面对日益复杂严峻的自然灾害风险形势，需要我们各个国家呢继续携手同行，不断提升灾害风险防控能力，积极参与全球的减灾行动。近年来，中国政府以习近平主席提出的防灾、减灾、救灾2个坚持、3个转变的理念为指导，坚持以防为主，强化综合减灾，在改革完善防灾、减灾、救灾体制机制，摸清灾害风险隐患底数，提升灾害监测预警响应能力，加大灾害风险防范的投资，加强灾后恢复重建，以及强化科技减灾救灾，提升基层防灾减灾能力等方面都做了不少的探索，形成了一系列的经验做法。那么我也将在下面的接下来的会议议程中，围绕今天咱们这个会议的主题，也就是加强金砖国家在后疫情时代的社会经济复杂， 这一主题呢，与大家交流分享，也非常希望能借此机会学习各国在防灾、减灾、救灾方面的改革实践经验和先进技术成果，持续拓宽合作范围渠道，丰富合作形式，深化双边、多边防灾、减灾、救灾交流合作，不断推动金砖国家防灾减灾和应急管理合作的实现新发展，为加快构建人类命运共同体做出新贡献。期待大家的精彩演讲和交流讨论，也预祝本次会议取得圆满的成功。谢谢大家。
Thank you very much to Ms. Yuan Yi, who is the Deputy Director General of the Department of Risk Monitoring and Integrated Disaster Reduction in China. Another round of applause to her, please. Outlining the posture of China, what is being done in the country at the moment, and of course expressing their will looking forward to sharing lessons with other member countries insofar as disaster management is concerned. I would just like to check once again with the technical team if we are able to cross virtually to Brazil. Are we sorted? Not yet? Okay. So we can't even go to India either? No? You see, you're using hand signals, which are very confusing there. You're doing this. Are we ready to cross to Brazil? No. We're ready to cross to India.
Are we sorted?
Thank you.
Not yet?
Audible to all?
Okay. So we can't even go to India either? No? You see, you're using hand signals, which are very confusing there. You're doing this.
It looks like...
are we ready to cross to...
Kindly confirm if I'm audible to you all.
Their input and less welcome.
We're ready to cross to India.
Is the director of the National Disaster Management Authority to make an input on behalf of India. Over to you, ma'am.
No, we are ready to actually... Okay, it looks like we can now cross live to India for their input, and let's welcome Ms. Srivastava, who is the Director of the National Disaster Management Authority, to make an input on behalf of India. Over to you, ma'am.
So, we are ready to actually.
I assume I am audible to all of you. Namaskar from India. Dr. Musa Guledi, Dr. Mkizi, Dr. Ilyas Sithole, Mr. Mulolo Peshavana. I would like to congratulate South Africa as chair of BRICS and in successful conduct of the BRICS Summit. We also appreciate the way South Africa has taken forward the critical issue of disaster management and disaster risk reduction. COVID-19 pandemics exposed the world to the flaws of delivery of social services, the impact that it had on people's survival, livelihood, and overall dignity has forced governments to reflect not not only of epidemiology, but also socio-economic and ecological interventions. In line with the development that we had, the way South Africa has taken forward India's critical issue of disaster management and disaster risk reduction, and best practices in the key areas of disaster management exposed, including comprehensive disaster risk monitoring, early warning, its assessment, and its last-minute dissemination. We are also geared to building up of emergency rescue forces, their appropriate capacity building, post-disaster recovery and reconstruction, and the role of science and technology and informatization in supporting disaster risk reduction with the BRICS nations. India is committed to improving the disaster management cooperation mechanism and in supporting enhancing the capacities of disaster management of partner BRICS nations. It has significantly promoted the BRICS cooperation in practical and result-oriented manner to support the leading role played by United Nations agencies in global disaster governance and to actively implement the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the Global Development Initiative. India has made significant strides in strengthening communication and coordination concerning national disaster risk reduction strategies and policies. We are developing technical cooperation and exchanges and working in tandem with our response agencies in tackling disaster risks and challenges. Through National Disaster Management Authority, we are working towards making our cities risk resilient, risk financing the urban and social infrastructure, and building future-ready urban and social infrastructure. We are working in this direction with our technical partner, Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, which was launched at the UN Climate Summit in 2019. India is also looking at incentivizing private investment and social protection mechanisms in collaboration with the United Nations Office of Disaster Risk Reduction, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, International Monetary Fund, and Asian Development Bank. We are mindful of eco-based approaches for disaster risk reduction and its cross-cutting impact in the areas of early warning, infrastructure, financing, and response. We are working once again with our technical and knowledge partners, international organizations in establishing eco-based approaches to disaster risk reduction. Finally, India reaffirms its commitment to mutually accelerated growth, sustainable development, and inclusivity, particularly through its efforts in disaster risk reduction and disaster management. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you. Namaste, indeed. Giving us a statement in terms of what is being done in India when it comes to disaster management, and of course examples of the partnerships and the collaborations that they are extending also to ensure that they incentivize private sector investment, but partnerships also with other organizations such as the OECD to make sure that they continue to learn from one another and support each other when it comes to disaster and risk management. I assume that the connection might still be in the process of being sorted out, so I'm going to come back here to Ethekwini so that we can then take input from the representatives that are here with us. Let us give this opportunity to a representative of Russia. Listen carefully now. Mr. Vladimir Zolovev, who is the Director of International Cooperation department in Russia. Over to you, sir.
Добрый день, уважаемые дамы и господа, уважаемые коллеги. В первую очередь хотел бы поприветствовать участников нашей встречи и поблагодарить организаторов за теплый прием. В настоящее время мировое сообщество все чаще сталкивается с рисками возникновения чрезвычайных ситуаций природного и техногенного характера. И это накладывает на наши страны обязательство тесно взаимодействовать и обмениваться новыми практиками в преодолении последствий ликвидации чрезвычайных ситуаций и, конечно, их предупреждения. Многопрофильное сотрудничество на площадке БРИКС не только подтверждает свою актуальность, но и активно развивается. Очередной практический шаг данного поступательного движения был принят на прошедшей встрече руководителей стран «пятерки». И если оценивать реализацию тех решений, которые были приняты на той встрече, то хотелось бы отметить, что мы последовательно придерживаемся приоритетности человеческой жизни, поддержки центральной роли Организации Объединенных Наций, дальнейшее содействие реализации Сендайской рамочной программы на период 2015-2030 годы, а также Парижского соглашения об изменении климата и повестки Дня Организации Объединенных Наций в области устойчивого развития до 2030 года. В следующем году к нашей работе подключатся новые партнеры из Латинской Америки, Африки и Ближнего Востока. Уверен, что они принесут дополнительные веяния и полезные тенденции, в том числе и в нашу рабочую группу по предупреждению и ликвидации чрезвычайных ситуаций. Сегодня же в ходе спланированной работы руководители и эксперты профильных департаментов Российского спасательного ведомства выступят по предложенным в повестку тематикам совместного обсуждения. Это касается важных и злободневных вопросов восстановления после пандемии коронавируса, а также образовательных процессов в интересах безопасности населения. Уверен, что по итогам плодотворной дискуссии будут сформулированы предложения, которые лягут в основу нашего будущего сотрудничества во имя безопасности населения и территорий от чрезвычайных ситуаций природного и техногенного характера. Желаю всем участникам интересной встречи. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sullivan. Indeed, as you share the experiences of Russia and indicate the expectations in terms of specific proposals that will be shared for collaboration going forward, that is indeed the expectation. Later in the program, during the course of the day, as we conclude the day sessions, we are going to call colleagues back again to arising out of the discussions from today, then put forward specific proposals exactly in line with what you're saying around proposals for collaboration. Thank you very much once again. Testing, Brazil. Yeah, see, this one is clear. Okay. We are not ready to cross live to Brazil as yet, so we're coming back to South Africa again. Let me introduce the Director General of the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, Dr. Robert Nguni. DG.
Okay. Good morning, Program Director. Program Director, I must say at the onset that you have done very well in acknowledging all dignitaries, so I'm not going to do that. It's safe to say all protocol observed. Now I rise here, I stand before you as a person who's coming from the presidency of the Republic of South Africa. Now, it is so fitting that I've been asked to be the one who present the progress report on behalf of the Republic of South Africa, merely because the presidency in the Republic of South Africa has a responsibility to ensure that all international agreements and programs are translated into concrete actions that are also accompanied by the budgets so that we can implement. So I'm the most relevant person, I guess, to perform this task. So what I'm going to do, colleagues, I'm just going to take you through the report back from the Republic of South Africa and raise some of the issues that may need to be processed going forward. Now, the first thing is that South Africa, in its reflections, recognizes that the last meeting was on point in saying that we live in different times, times that we have not known before, which call for new ways of doing things. What is even more interesting for South Africa is that what was discussed in the last meeting also coincide with decisions that have been taken in other platforms, and I can mention some of them. One, the Sendai framework that has been mentioned earlier on, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Now, all these covenants or agreements converge in one thing, that we have to be proactive in everything that we do. So this is a running thread across the board that whatever we do, we have to be proactive. Now there is a cost in not being proactive. And I wish to believe that this meeting will put more emphasis again on that understanding. Now, coming back to the resolutions of the last meeting, one can divide the resolutions into two areas. One, there are resolutions that are pointed at what nation states must do, what countries must do. But also at the same time, there are resolutions that point to what we must do as a collective. So we have to pay attention to what we need to do as nation states, but at the same time, pay attention to what we need to do as a collective. Now, as we look at the resolutions of the last meeting, we note as South Africa that almost all of them remain very relevant, and I can just highlight one or two of those resolutions just to underscore the fact that there is continuity from what we discussed in the past. One issue is around the need to improve our disaster prevention and relief systems. The other issue is the need to improve disaster management capabilities within and between countries, and also to strengthen exchange and cooperation amongst countries. Now, what is being proposed today, the focus on socio-economic issues, is an addition, in our view, to what we have discussed in the previous meeting and agreed to do. But what will be key, colleagues, is having a plan of action that will accompany the declaration, so that when we meet in the next meeting, we can work in a program or project management way to review progress. Now, very quickly, in terms of what we've done in South Africa, I will highlight three issues. And in the main, all of them were around dealing with the kind of challenges that we're faced with as a country. One, colleagues referred to disaster management in relation to the flooding in this particular area, and also on managing the COVID pandemic. Now, three things come to mind in terms of what we've done as a country. And one was to deal with people issues. that in managing disaster, one thing that we can't avoid is dealing with people issues. In fact, disaster management is inherently about people issues, and some of the colleagues from South Africa who are going to speak are going to expatiate on this. The other issue has been to revise or to review our disaster management system. Now, the work system is very important because it underscores that you have to integrate many things if you are to deal with a disaster. So that's one thing that we are busy with as South Africa. And lastly, we're focused on socio-economic recovery, which I must say it is an ongoing endeavor that government is busy with. Now, having dealt with these issues that I've referred to, going forward, we are now planning for the next administration for South Africa, what we call the 7th administration, as we'll be having elections next year. So in that exercise, we are going to focus on future issues. So we've dealt with the immediate issues, and now we need to plan for the future. Having said that, colleagues, we wish you well in your deliberations and emphasize that the declaration that will come out of here should be accompanied by a concrete plan, but at the same time, countries must also have their own plans that we can measure and review at the end of the day. Thank you.
Let's thank Dr. Nguna again, ladies and gentlemen, from the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation in the Presidency, talking there about what South Africa has been doing, and with an emphasis on the 3 areas, focusing on people, focusing on the system, disaster management system, and of course on recovery, and advising very strongly that we must be proactive, make sure that we have a declaration out of this, followed by a concrete plan of action for implementation, which we will then review in terms of progress the next time we meet. Thank you very much, Dr. Nguna. I'm going to try again to check if it is possible to connect to, okay, it's still not possible to connect to Mr. Paulo Falco. I think it's okay because a little later in the program, there will be other slots and opportunities that we will then make available for the input to be made. Thank you so much to the members of this panel. Dr. Nguna, thank you. Ms. Yi, thank you very much. Mr. Vladimir, thank you so much. And we are now going to go on to the next session. If we could then give them a round of applause as they take leave of the podium. Thank you very much. So at this stage, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite the facilitator for the first thematic session. We're going to go into thematic sessions now. We've got 2 thematic sessions, one focusing on strengthening post-pandemic socio-economic recovery in the BRICS countries, and the second one, which will be focusing on transforming education and skills development for the future. There will be a facilitator for each one of those sessions. Let me invite Professor Colleen Vogel, who is from the University of the Witwatersrand, who will be assisting us to facilitate this session. She will be joined on the stage by a number of panel members. There is let me, as she joined us, also take this opportunity to acknowledge the presence amongst us of our Deputy Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs in South Africa, Honorable Zolile Bensingamashe Chawe Zuliajik. You're welcome, Deputy Minister. as I hand over to Professor.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Honourable Ministers, key officials, all protocols observed. I know you've all been sitting for a very long time, and we apologise for some of the delays. So what I'm going to suggest is that we start off. I'm not sure that we have the video anymore. From what I gather, that's already been done. So I presume we don't have to repeat. So I'm going to invite Dr. Albert Edgar Minucci to come up and do his presentation. And then what I'd like to suggest, but I'm not one of the official organisers, that we then break for tea, and then we come back to start the panel. Would that be in order? And maybe waving of hands or something. But if not, I might have to take a body break myself. I'm a bit old. But I can hear everyone's clapping. Right, let's go with that. So Edgar, if you would please come forward. Edgar is a very interesting character. He's one of my ex-students, so I'm very proud to introduce him to you. Edgar, please come forward. He's done a lot of work in the health community, also in COVID, and I don't want to waste any more time, but I'll turn it over to Edgar Minucci. Thanks, Edgar.
Thank you very much, Prof. Colin. All protocols observed, and thank you very much. I'm not so sure if I can go ahead with my presentation.
Sorry, could we please have Edgar's presentation put on screen, if possible? I don't see any hands waving. That worries me. Is Edgar's presentation ready to come up? Otherwise, we must break now and then come back. Can you do it? Yeah. Okay. Edgar is so well trained that he says he'll do it without the slides. So thank you, Edgar. Over to you.
Thanks, Prof. Thanks, Prof. Allow me to just go through what I wanted to present in the slides that I had. And I think I have a very good task at hand, because some of the things that I wanted actually to present on have been said by the previous speakers. But there were three key messages that I wanted to bring to fore. And the first one was we did an exercise with the National Disaster Management Center where we looked at the lessons that we learned from the COVID-19 pandemic in relation to socio-economic recovery within the SADC region, and the systematic risks associated with COVID-19 and the cascading and systemic risks as well associated with COVID-19. And in our job there, we actually discovered, or we actually had a few lessons that I wanted to share with you. Thank you. I think in terms of South African findings, we had about 6 findings that I wanted to share with you. The first one is COVID-19 affected various facets, if not all facets, of South Africans' lives. And In terms of the second point is we had many deaths arising from COVID in the country, and we also had many infections arising from COVID-19. And the third one was South Africa was kind of uniquely affected in terms of COVID-19 in relation to other African countries. So we had a unique pandemic to this country, and there were various socio-economic drivers to that uniqueness that we actually can look at and attribute to South Africa. Then the fourth one is response to COVID facilitated closer working relationships within departments in government. And I think previous speakers have alluded to the use of the Disaster Management Act in bringing together various sectors. And I think our report is very clear that there was closer cooperation and closer interactions between government departments in response to COVID-19 pandemic. And the other or fifth finding was basically other hazards also occurred during COVID. So the nation was not only responding to COVID-19, and I'll elaborate on this point because it's a very important point and I would want to persuade us to look at it seriously within the context of BRICS countries. And then of course the last finding was science-informed policy as well as other facets of our lives, especially in terms of implementation of response processes. And I would want to elaborate this point further again in my next slide. It's a very important point because of the role science played in terms of our response to COVID. But allow me to shift from this South African focus to the BRICS and international focus, because that's the essence of why we are here. And the key question I would want to answer today is basically what are the key lessons we learned from COVID-19 pandemic, which are essential for disaster risk management and recovery processes. This is the key question that I'm going to be attacking. And I think why are we starting from COVID-19 pandemic? And I think I have two issues here, or 2 points here. The first thing is COVID-19 has been more than a health crisis. So it was so pervasive that it entered into various facets of life, including the social structures, including the economic structures. And therefore, COVID can be an entry point to any discussion that we want to deal with in relation to disaster risk management and recovery processes. But the key issue is not really broadly like that, that it transcended the health sector. The key issue for me is there are actually 3 lessons that we can learn from responding to COVID-19 pandemic. And the first one is the cascading and systematic risks that we associate with COVID-19. And the second one is actually we have lessons that we can learn for risk management and recovery. And the third one is we have actually bigger lessons or greater lessons that we can learn in terms of better preparedness for future hazards and their cascading effects. These are the key reasons why I think COVID becomes a very important entry point to our discussions that we are going to have. If we learned something from COVID, I think we can actually be able to manage better any future hazards that will occur. If we didn't learn anything from COVID, then we'll have serious problems because future hazards are going to be much more difficult to manage because of their recurrence, their intensity, and also their frequency. So I think the anchor point for us and our discussion should be how we managed COVID. Allow me to then move and try to persuade you on this one, that we are living in an environment where we are faced with multiple hazards, or we are living in a multi-hazard environment. And I think my initial slide talked about this, where I said I will elaborate this point further. So whilst we are responding to COVID, we were also supposed to respond to multiple hazards in South Africa. And indeed, it is actually something that we need to be grateful that the teams on the ground managed to respond to this. We had floods happening during COVID. We had wildfires happening during COVID. We had listeriosis outbreak happening during COVID. We also had cholera outbreaks happening during COVID. And the teams on the ground who were on the forefront of managing these things managed actually to respond to this. And I think this is kind of now the future. And I would want to persuade you to say this is actually the future we are going to be facing, where we are actually going to have multiple hazards happening or occurring at the same time. So the key issue for us is actually to look at a whole of society approach. And I would like to thank the previous speaker who actually alluded to this, that we need to take a whole of society approach in responding to future hazards that are going to be coming up. And then, of course, the systemic and cascading nature of the risks demands a paradigm shift in terms of our thinking processes. So I will actually go a bit deeper in terms of this. And the key issue is we need to be more coordinated and coherent in terms of what we do, and in terms of looking at some of the actions that we take. We need to be more deliberate as well in terms of what we do. So this is actually something that I think I am persuading you to look at things in a very different form and in a different way. And I think the video from Ethekwini was quite comprehensive in terms of a paradigm shift that we need to look at. I think from that video, the key lesson is basically we need to integrate our policies and systems and actions so that we achieve better outcomes than before. I think the key issue as well that I want to look at is basically there is intersectionalities of risk that we are dealing with going forward. So it's no longer business as usual, as the previous speaker has said, and therefore we need to look at things differently. I think the key lessons for me and the BRICS countries and everybody who is here to look at this, the first lesson is actually traditional approaches to risk management or to disaster risk management are no longer going to be effective, or they are going to be less effective as we go forward. And I think we now need innovative ideas that will actually make us be much more responsive to the challenges that are coming ahead. And I think this, I am preaching to the converted because IPCC report are saying this. And there are various factors that are going to drive a different world from what we are currently experiencing. Climate change is one of the key factors, and there is unequivocal evidence that climate change is going to exacerbate the effects of an intensity of extreme weather events, including heat and heat waves, floods, wildfires, and all other sorts of yet detected forms of hazards that we are going to experience. The second one is I think we need new and flexible finance mechanisms and of course targeted investment which are necessary for disaster risk response. And I'm happy because already this has already been tackled. And I think in the context of BRICS countries and sharing, we need to look at our current finance mechanisms and say, where can we actually integrate our systems? Where can we actually work collaboratively and with what results? But going with the traditional finance mechanisms might not enable us to reach where we want to reach. For example, if we have two hazards happening at the same time, I think flexibility should be ingrained in the response mechanism, and the procurement processes need to be reviewed and analyzed so that they can respond to those two hazards that are happening at the same time. So I think it's a key requirement to be innovative in the area of finance, and I think we will reflect on those things. The third one is we need to be innovative in terms of our infrastructure designs and also the insurance processes around this. And I think I would not need to belabor on this point because the previous speaker have already talked about the necessity to look at infrastructure differently. The fourth point is I think we need to leverage on technologies and data systems for us to be able to respond effectively, especially within the context of BRICS countries. And I think we have various dimensions and various capabilities that we can actually leverage on each other. For example, South Africa has a very good data system in terms of weather forecasting and weather reporting. I think other countries might actually take into consideration the South African capabilities. And other countries as well might actually look at what technologies from elsewhere, Brazil, India, China, which South Africa can also leverage on for the purposes of disaster risk management. And I think this is key for us to be moving forward appropriately. Then, of course, many speakers, if not all, have talked about the new skills that are necessary in terms of disaster risk management and in terms of recovery processes going forward. Everyone is talking about re-looking as well at our knowledge systems, at our education systems, so that we build better capabilities for responding to the new world that is going to be confronting us. And the last is basically we need a coordinated approach and a broad spectrum than the current analysis. And the current analysis seems to look at things in silos. Here we need to have a coordinated approach to things. We need to look at the whole value chain, from prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery, and also resilience within the resilience framework. And I'm happy because all previous speakers mentioned the issues around the SDGs as a framework that can guide us in terms of collaboration and working together. And I think this is very important, and this is going to be a very important asset in going forward. We need to actually peg our discussions and our interactions and actions to existing frameworks that we know, and also look and review how far we have gone within, as we try to meet those frameworks. And lastly, I think this is my last slide, and I think this is key to me, and I think it is key to several speakers who have spoken. I was actually borrowing a quote and changing a bit from the Secretary General of the World Health Organization during the heat of the COVID pandemic. And he said, I think there has been more attention to one word, and that word during that time was COVID-19. And he was saying, I think there's also more attention to one department and one sector in the current analysis of things. And he was saying, let's look at other different words and other meanings and other ways of doing business. And some of those might even matter more than the single words that we use in our daily lives here. And the key issues that he mentioned there is we need to look at prevention and preparedness. That's a different word from what people usually talk about. We need to look at disaster risk reduction broadly. We also need to look at development planning. We need to look at human well-being. We need to look at recovery with an economic focus, and I think this is the key focus of this team. Then from there, we need to look at the political leadership. And I think I'm happy because the political leadership today availed itself and is well engaged in these processes. And of course, it's all about the people. And the previous speaker said it's all about the communities. Thank you very much.
Thanks very, very much, Dr. Minucci. You've raised a number of interesting points, particularly about systemic risks, risk management and recovery, being better prepared, and you also raised that maybe we should be using some different words. So I've heard this morning about bouncing back, but maybe we really need to be thinking about bouncing forward. We've heard about building back. Maybe we need to be thinking about building forward, really thinking about risk reduction. But thank you so much for a very insightful presentation. I'm going to allow for 2 questions, if there's anyone who would like, because I often find these meetings are lots of from the panel down and very little chance for people to really make inputs of their own. So I'd open it up for 2 questions from the floor. Please use your microphone, and if you're needing translation devices, please use that as well. So 2 questions or 2 comments, 2 interventions. Right at the back, I'll take yours first, thank you. And please direct it to Edgar. Do you have access to a microphone?
Yes. So thanks, Chairperson. No, my question to the doctor is, I heard him talking about, abandoning the traditional approaches. If he can just please elaborate on what is he referring to specifically, because I'm actually tempted to have a different view unless I hear exactly what is it that he refers to practically, then I can express a view. Thank you. I don't know if Chairperson will want me to come back after he has outlined exactly what are those, because I want to express a view even after he has said exactly what are those.
All right. Let's just hear his response, and then I'll give you 1 second to come back. This is dramatically different.
Thank you very much. So the traditional approaches, I'm sorry, I might have got into a political situation here, but the traditional approaches that I was talking about is the idea of us looking at things in silos. For example, if we want to look at recovery. We then focus on recovery and we put resources on recovery without looking at the whole value chain to say, okay, before we get to recovery, what are we doing in terms of proactive approaches, prevention, preparedness, and all that. So the focus should actually change. Let's look at a value chain rather than the siloed approach of looking at things individually. That's the traditional approach that I was referring to.
Thanks very much. Does that suffice?
Yeah, no, it does, because I actually had assumed that he's talking about traditional practices, so I'm happy that he's mentioning that. Thanks.
We hopefully wouldn't go and do that. One last question. Oh, there you are at the back of the room. Thank you. Please come through.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Tsepokoza. I'm the MMC responsible for public safety in the city of Matlosan. Doctor, I'm having a concern because we have identified that disaster is playing a very critical role in the lives of our people. But I'm worried in terms of how do you influence from the presidency budget calculating to the municipality, local municipality and district municipalities, because it's where we find more challenges. Can you maybe clarify that and maybe tell us what is your plan? Because when you go to municipalities, there is a little in terms of budget, but disasters are happening every day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think it's a relevant question, but to the wrong person. But I would want to say, I think the president is quite engaged, and I think we have a representative of the presidency who might actually be able to answer these things. I don't know whether you would want to take on this one. I'm the wrong person, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. I will ask Dr. Grisel, maybe as a preview to a presentation, to respond to that. Yeah.
A very quick preview.
All right, thank you. So obviously, it's no point in having policy and even development plans and so on if you don't have the budgets aligned to the plans, aligned to the priorities and the policies to give effect to those priorities. And without preempting the next panel, there is, the colleague would be aware, the MMC, of the district development model. And, you know, the idea, it's still being fully developed, of having a one budget. In other words, you take a district and you look at all the different organs of state and their budgets that are being spent within that particular, in order to address the particular needs. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much for that. And thanks, Edgar. Can I give you another round of applause with everybody? Thanks, Edgar. We do have the panel next, and I know we have Dr. Anthea Stevens, for example, who also will be from the National Treasury side. So I think that question will be debated and discussed quite a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we really deserve a big break now, but I don't want you to take too long. Can I please ask if you would come back in 15 minutes, if that will be sufficient? I hope so, because that's how it was originally scheduled in the program. And then if I could ask the panelists if you could come in at least 5 minutes before, because I do think we need to mic up and get things coordinated. So a big round of applause for everyone this morning. Thank you very, very much. Enjoy your tea.